All right, cool. So this kind of actually goes in with, we'll start from the beginning theme here. This goes in with today's theme, which oftentimes with technology, things don't go according to plan. And so this is actually the second time I presented on BackupBuddy, but things have changed in the last year, so I wanted to make sure and come back and revisit some of this. Now, it's a Saturday. Many of you are here. We all have these honey-do lists, right? And so your wife asks you, or maybe you have your own personal honey-do list, and you've got things to do, right? Sometimes things get accomplished. Sometimes they don't get accomplished. Sometimes you wish you've accomplished something. Maybe you've been up in the middle of the night, and you know that dreadful feeling. The dreadful feeling that you've lost your website. So when you're up there and maybe you got to look like this on your face as you're looking at your monitor. You're looking down at your computer and you're just thinking, man, I should have backed this thing up. What am I going to do? You might call up GoDaddy in the middle of the night, which they do have 24-hour support, but they may not have a backup for you. You may have lost blog posts. You may have lost some photos. You may have lost some work, tremendous amounts of work that you put into this. And that's why we're talking about backup today. And so I don't have any statistics for WordPress in general, but I do have statistics for how people back up their computers and how often that's done. Backblaze did a survey, and they said that approximately 90% of people don't back up their computer regularly. 10% of people do. And you know what? That was actually a success story in that article because it had gone up 30% since 2011. So we're actually getting better numbers because companies like Backblaze, companies like BackupBuddy are out there making it easier for us to do. Now computers, they do their thing. They know when to do things. You can set schedules and make sure they do things on time. BackupBuddy has scheduling, so it can take that to-do list away from you. It's got two options. Once you get in, once you install the plugin, you can either back up just the database, which is just the data inside the computer, not the files, not the images, not the JPEGs, or you can do a complete backup. You can click one of those two buttons. You can download a nice little zip file, save it on your computer, tell your son about it, tell your daughter about it, tell your tech guru about it, and say, hey, I'm covered. Now, we talked about scheduling and to-do lists and making sure that we keep things clear so we can come to nice events like this. With scheduling, with BackupBuddy, we have lots of different options. We've got monthly options, twice monthly. I know it's a little bit hard for you all to read, all the way down to hourly. If you do a lot of blog posts like Aida or maybe Chris back there, you might be doing these things hourly. Me, I'm like weekly. So it'll even suggest to you how often you want to do it. So I don't know, what's good? Hourly, twice a day? It'll say, hey, start out with daily database only, weekly full backup. Now, this plugin's pretty robust. It's got lots of options for what you can do. You want to make sure you're not relying on just backing up to the web server only. If you just click that button, complete backup, or if you click database backup only, all it's going to do is create a zip file and it's going to stay on the server. I actually had a problem with a local host here. I won't mention who they were, but I had a problem with them. I had uploaded a bunch of files to the server and I was just testing them out, so I didn't really actually get a whole lot of work or I guess critical work done on there. I was just testing them out, hadn't put everything up there, but their hard drive went bad on their web server. And so that drive went bad. They said, no problem, we'll have it back up in no time. It went back up, went back down, went back up, went back down. Apparently they were having a problem with their computer. Their RAID server went down, took out all the backups. I lost everything on that computer. Luckily, like I mentioned, it was just a test server. We weren't doing much with it. So I was able to not get too mad at tech support in that case, not curse myself for not having installed BackupBuddy on there yet. But it was definitely a lesson. And that lesson is that you have to make sure that when you're backing things up, that you send that file to a remote destination, a third party, somewhere else out there in the cloud. Now, there are a number of options here. If you have a small website, perhaps you're just starting out with your blog or your website, you can have things emailed to you. So you could send something less. This is a good option for those of you who have a website that's maybe less than 10 megabytes in size. Once you get to around 20, 50, your email server is not going to like you if you start sending backups that way. So the next option after that is Dropbox. I know a lot of you use Dropbox in this room, and it can send, I'd say, up to 100 megabytes. Dropbox is a good option for y'all. If you're a techie, you might want to go with FTP. But if you're not, FTP might be a little bit tough to configure. You may not realize what the server is or what the server settings are. And so there are other options. We talked about local. For the developers in the room and for those of you who have messed around with a lot of Amazon and Rackspace stuff, you can send gigantic files out there. We talk about small backup sizes, medium, large, and, well, infinity, I guess. The largest, whatever you can afford, you can send it over to these guys over here. Now, there is an easy-to-use option, which has the performance of these two, but is also easy to use, easy enough for mom, and that's called BackupBuddy Stash. And that's what's changed in the last year. In the last year, they've rolled this out, and they actually, if you buy the BackupBuddy plugin, they'll give you 512 megs, a gigabyte, depending on what kind of promotion they're running, of free space. So that's enough for most anybody in the room here. Now, for the developers in the room, I know Chris and some other folks that are in here, there are some other options. And so if you work with some developers, they'll talk to you about staging servers. And you want to make sure that when you're updating your website, doing some large plugin changes or maybe changing a theme, that you don't change your production website. You want to make sure that when you're doing that level of change, that you do it on a test server somewhere else. And oftentimes, this is referred to as a staging server. So with this BackupBuddy Stash option, part of the plugin, you can actually send data over to them in the cloud. Now, many of you, if you're doing a backup, you will do a download from your site to your office. You might do an upload later on to your staging server if you're a developer or if you're really wanting to get into this stuff. You might be working from home, so you're doing the same thing, downloading from your site, going home, and then uploading later on staging. Now, your website or your internet connection home may not be all that fast. You might be on the go, and realistically, you're probably doing something like this, where you're downloading to Starbucks and then uploading, and y'all know that's kind of a dicey situation. We'll just call it that. So Stash comes in handy. You can be up at Starbucks, and you could say, send this thing to BackupBuddy Stash. Later on, you say, all right, well, now I'm ready to get it ready on the staging server. I'll download a staging server. You can be at Starbucks, send a 400 meg file up there, download a 400 meg file, and it will do it rather rapidly. So we've got different service options here. It's like, how fast is fast? AT&T, we have AT&T Uverse. Depending on which package you have, you're somewhere around 1/3 of a megabit, all the way up to about 3 megabits. Not too fast for uploading. Comcast starts at the same spot, goes all the way up. Cable's got a lot of bandwidth, and so you can go all the way up to 65 megabits. Not cheap. You're probably paying $100 or $200 a month for your internet connection at that point. Same thing with Verizon. Verizon starts out fast and goes all the way up. In my testing with BackupBuddy Stash, I've got a number of websites that are running this and a number of websites that I do this particular procedure with. And you're looking at about 16 to 28 megabits. So what does that translate into? That translates into time saved. If you need to back up your site, put it up on the Stash, download it, you can do it much faster than if you were doing it from home. So BackupBuddy is a great plugin. It's got lots of options for you. You can schedule your backups, save your honey-do list for things that are much more important, like cleaning the house, doing that spring cleaning that you all love to do, or maybe skipping out on that and going to a nice event. So there are hosting limitations. We talked about GoDaddy. We talked about some of the other options for shared hosting. Chris Harris in the back there is an expert with WP Engine. They actually don't allow BackupBuddy, but they have their own option, which is also very good. They can set up staging servers for you. Chris can show you how he can just click that little button, get everything done that he needs to get done back there. Synthesis, I don't know, are there any folks in here that use Synthesis? Do they have a pretty good backup option now?
They just introduced the Amazon S3 option and their own backup that will work, again, because of that. BackupBuddy needs a lot of permission.
Right.
And some of these WordPress-specific hosts don't want to give it.
Right, right.
So they created their own.
And if they create their own, that's great. It's when they don't give you that option that it gets a little bit frustrating. So
I'll just say, until I went to WP Engine with my sites, I was a big BackupBuddy user. Any site that I have that's non-WP Engine is running backup.
yeah, absolutely. You want to make sure you're covered one way or another. Amazon Cloud Hosting, that's one that I use. Works great with BackupBuddy. Shared hosting, it's kind of, most of the time it works. If you're in an environment that's an overloaded server, you can have some issues there. But once again, they've done a great job in really just kind of overcoming some of these issues. Dedicated servers, no problem. Virtual private servers, no problem. So we've kind of covered a lot. We've covered the scheduling. We've covered the hosting limitations. We've covered the Stash. Do you guys have any questions as far as, yep?
Hi, Don, it's Susie.
Hi, hey, yeah, sorry, yeah.
On the Stash, is that 1 gigabyte free space per, if you have a license, is it per license, is it per web, is it per subscription?
Yeah. Good question, Susie. It's per license, and Susie and I both have developer licenses for BackupBuddy Stash, and so you would get 1 gig free with that. You can actually increase it. And so what I did was I increased it to like 5 or 10, I don't remember what it is, but they'll go up to around 50 gigs. And so if you need a lot of space, you just pay them a flat monthly or a flat yearly fee, and then they'll just be happy to help you out.
If you you buy a developer license, you're getting 1 gig per every license that you.
Not per install. You get 1 gig per developer license.
Oh, 1 gig total.
And that's
of all
shared
your
with all
sites.
your clients.
Okay, that was my question. It's
Yeah,
per
typically-
total of all your client sites.
Correct. And typically what I do is I'll put all the files on Amazon S3 for my clients, and then for the ones that I need to move around from production to staging, I'll just use Stash for just that. I don't use Stash for everyone. I use Amazon S3. It's actually much cheaper, but it's just tougher to install. You have to go into Amazon, set up payment with them. You have to get a couple of different passwords and all of that. So it can be a little bit tricky. Stash is just username, login, you're done. Good question. Tony?
My favorite part of BackupBuddy is the migration system. You want to talk about that?
Yes, absolutely. That is the key portion of BackupBuddy, and I'm glad you brought that up. We mentioned it a little bit further or in more depth in the previous presentation. So you've got a website. Let's say it's www.wordpress.com, and you want to move it over to wordpress.org. And you don't want to go in and rename everything. You don't want to have to change your blog articles, your URLs inside the posts. All of those are pointing to your .com site. Well, when you're moving from one server to another, it'll ask you during the process, it'll say, okay, what's the URL for your new website? You type that thing in, it goes to the database, and it replaces. And there's thousands of replacements that you have to go in and do there, which I did manually a couple of times. I was like, there's got to be a plugin for this. Turns out there was. And so that was the last time I did that. Good question.
Would that work for when I first did my first website? I did that really goofy permalink, date and all this other stuff in there. Now they're saying that's bad for SEO. So I don't want to have to go through, like you said, and do it manually. Will that migration work to go and change the permalinks?
As far as the permalinks are concerned, generally what you do there is you can go inside the settings dashboard in WordPress, and you can just change the option, and it will update the permalinks for you.
Because I heard if you did that, it would like, you'll lose.
You'll want to know what your old links were before you do that so that you can map them to the new links.
That's an SEO question.
Yeah, and there are plugins for that too.
Yeah, we do that with a redirect plugin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you definitely want to redirect it, and that's a good point. Susie?
I have another question. So one great thing about having BackupBuddy is if your site breaks or something like that, something happens, you can then restore it.
Correct.
Which I've never had happen to me until this week.
Oh, wow.
I had a great site break, and I went to restore it. But I had all kinds of problems with the restore. Can you, because it seemed like it was asking me to do an install, like a brand
Right.
new site. And then it asked me to rename my database, and everything was like brand new. And I just had a lot of problems, and I just wondered if you could talk about what the
Yeah.
process is.
Typically what I do for a restore is kind of like with Windows, you're better off starting with a fresh start. If you upgrade Windows or you have to kind of go a couple versions, it'll mess with you. And especially with WordPress, in this case, you're going back in time.
Right.
And so typically what I will do is I will remove all the files and put them in a temporary backup directory. I'll copy the database, blow away the database, and then have BackupBuddy go in and just start fresh.
Like I had done a backup right before my site broke, so I
Nice.
wasn't worried.
Cool. Scheduled.
Well, no, I did it physically because I was going in to make some changes.
Right.
So I was like, I better back this up. So I had the backup. But I thought it would just be restoring, but instead it like acted like it was a new site.
You have to go in, and there's an option when you're restoring. You have to tell it to go in and wipe the database. Did you check that checkbox that said wipe the database?
I ended up going into the cPanel and just taking everything in the public, HTML folder, and backing up, putting it somewhere else.
Okay.
Starting like it was nothing there.
There you go, yeah.
But it still kept saying there's an existing database, and it still kept telling me to rename it and
Yeah.
put in new passwords and all this other stuff. So.
Sometimes what you have to do, if you want to keep the old database there, you can just create a new one. And then whenever you go through the connection settings, it'll ask you, hey, where's your database? And instead of saying, whatever the old database was, you just say the new one. And Chris, you got your hand up?
I was just going to, what I learned with BackupBuddy was that you should really test out the restore feature before you
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It does work, but at least it didn't work intuitively the way I expected it to. And when you're already stressed out because you have your site down, it's not when you want to learn how to use it. But once you learn how to use it, so I would just suggest everybody, you get the plugin, go try the restore thing out.
Right.
A dummy directory, a test site type thing, and then you'll figure it out for when you're.
That's good advice for any backup. Your backup's only as good as, I guess, how well you've tested it. And so if you don't test it, sometimes you'll think, yeah, I'm covered. And you'll go restore, oh, I've got 5 files instead of 500. So yeah, that's definitely a good point. Any other questions?
That's Does it have a cloning option, or?
It kind of does clone things for you because it will back up all the files in your directory and then as well as the database. And so assuming that you only have just the WordPress database and just those files and those directories, you're in good shape.
That's the import buddy, that's what we're calling that migration, is like a clone. So you can take your original, you can start on your laptop with really funny URL, like local.data something, or shared hosting, and then just take that original file. Like you can make a basic WordPress file, and then clone that, so you can start off with your clients with all their favorite plugins installed and that sort of thing. You can make sort of a shell configuration site.
Cool. Great.
So for people who are newbies and don't know, haven't gone through a seminar, saw this stuff,
Right.
they're just doing a backup and they're backing it up. Where does it put those backups? It puts it like within the same directory as all your other WordPress stuff, and
There's like a temp directory that puts it in. I think it's called BackupBuddy Temp, or it's kind of buried in there, and so it's a little bit tough to find.
yeah.
It's in the plugins directory.
Right.
But it's not, and it's just, so it's WP content /plugins/ BackupBuddy backups, and there is a BackupBuddy temp file.
And they're all like buried in there. So then when your site backs up again, is it backing up the backup?
No, sometimes.
'Cause my backup was like really huge, and I was like, this site isn't that big.
Yes. If it's working well, there's a couple of settings you can change in there if you're having problems with your host, and that can get you into trouble, where it doesn't realize what's backed up and whatnot. But if everything's working well and you're using the settings out of the box, it will not back itself up over and over again.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's kind of like a snowball rolling downhill, and you end up with this giant data ball, and
Right.
Eventually
I think
it
that's
breaks.
what
Yes, giant. That's gonna go out on Twitter. Giant data ball. Yeah. Great.
If you get the private plugin, how many blogs can you put that on?
You can, as long as it'll license for one site if you buy one license. Now you can buy multiple licenses. Then you can also buy a developer, which is unlimited. And so that's what Susie and I have done. And so we just install it everywhere, in staging servers and whatever, and you license each one of those. And it keeps track of all the licenses from within WordPress. And so let's say you bought like a 10 license pack and you're not sure which sites are licensed. It'll tell you by the URL. And so there might be one that you're not monitoring anymore, you don't need to back up. You just take that out of the list.
The directory is called BackupBuddy_10.
Ah, cool. Thank you.
Awesome.
Cool.
Underscore.
Cool.
How much is that developer's like?
It's about $200, $250, somewhere around there. And then you can renew the following year, so you still get support, and it's half price after that. But unless you really need more than half a dozen licenses or so, I wouldn't say it's necessarily worth it. I'd get a smaller pack and then just keep renewing that. Cool. And I want to make sure we have time for Chris and some of the other guys. Do we have any other? Is that good?
That was awesome.
Okay, cool.